The doctor said he heard 2 heartbeats. Why does everyone keep telling me I imagined that?
Because you did.
Mom, what did you do?
I did what this family needed done. Nothing more.
7 years and you never told him the truth?
Some truths aren't yours to give away.
On the night Amelia Bennett left her husband, she folded exactly 9 shirts into a suitcase that was not her own, tucked one framed photograph into her coat pocket, and did not shed a single tear. 6 years later, a woman in an emerald green dress would walk into a Boston ballroom holding the hand of a 7-year-old boy, and the man across that room would drop his glass on the marble floor. But before we get to that night, we need to go back to the beginning. Back to a marriage that looked perfect from the outside, a mother-in-law who smiled with her mouth but never her eyes, and a phone call that would change the direction of 4 lives forever. This is the story of a woman who was told her health, her safety, and her voice mattered less than one family's good name. And this is the story of what happens when a quiet woman finally decides she has had enough. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from tonight, and stay with me until the end, because this story is not what it seems. Amelia Bennett grew up in a small house outside Charleston, South Carolina, the kind of house where love was loud even when money was not. She met Alexander Whitfield at 26, at a fundraising dinner she had only attended because a friend needed a +1. Alexander was easy to love. He had a warm laugh, patient eyes, and a habit of remembering small details, the name of her childhood dog, her favorite tea, the fact that she hated cilantro. What Amelia did not fully understand, not yet, was that Alexander came from old money in Greenwich, Connecticut, and that his mother, Sophia Whitfield, had spent 40 years building a family name that she guarded the way other people guard their own children. Sophia was polished, composed, and terrifyingly precise. She never raised her voice. She did not need to. For the first 2 years of marriage, Amelia told herself the tension was ordinary. Every new bride has an adjustment period with her husband's family, she reasoned. Sophia corrected the way Amelia set a table. Sophia rewrote the seating chart at their own wedding without asking. Sophia referred to Amelia, in front of guests, as Alexander's very sweet wife, as though sweetness were the only quality worth nomming. Alexander would apologize privately, in the car, in bed, in whispered hallway conversations. "She means well," he would say. "She just has a strong personality." Amelia believed him, because she wanted to. She loved her husband, and she desperately wanted her marriage to work the way marriages were supposed to work, with 2 people standing together against the world, not one person standing beside his mother while his wife stood alone. Everything changed the week Amelia found out she was pregnant. She was 31 years old, 7 weeks along, and terrified and thrilled in equal measure. At her very first ultrasound, the technician paused a little longer than Amelia expected, tilted the screen, made a small, quiet sound, and then smiled and said everything looked completely normal for this stage. Amelia did not think much of it at the time. She was too busy staring at the flicker on the screen, too busy imagining a nursery, a name, a future. She told Alexander that night over dinner, and for one shining hour, he cried happy tears and held her hands across the table like a man who understood exactly what he had been given. Sophia's reaction was different. When Alexander called his mother with the news, Amelia heard Sophia's voice rise through the phone, not with joy, but with something closer to calculation. "How far along?" Sophia asked, before she asked anything else. "Is she seeing the family doctor in Greenwich or some stranger in the city?" Amelia laughed it off as old-fashioned concern. She had no idea, not yet, that Sophia Whitfield had already begun making plans, quiet plans, the kind a woman like Sophia had made her entire life, plans that treated people like pieces on a board rather than human beings with names and hearts and futures of their own. By her 6th month, Amelia's pregnancy had become difficult. Her blood pressure was climbing. Her ankles swelled by early afternoon. Her doctor in the city used the words watching closely and preeclampsia risk and told her in plain terms to reduce her stress, stay near her medical team, and rest as much as possible. Amelia followed every instruction. She turned down invitations. She left work early. She built her entire world around protecting the baby growing inside her. It was around this time that Sophia Whitfield made the demand that would break everything apart, the demand that Amelia still thinks about, even now, even years later, on quiet nights when the house is finally still. Sophia called a family meeting, the kind held in the formal sitting room of the Greenwich estate, the kind where decisions were announced rather than discussed. She informed Amelia and Alexander that the Whitfield Foundation Gala, the single most important social event of the family's year, was being moved up, and that Amelia would need to relocate to the estate for the final 10 weeks of her pregnancy to help oversee preparations, host visiting board members, and, in Sophia's words, finally learn what it means to carry the Whitfield name properly. The estate was 90 minutes from Amelia's doctor, her hospital, and every specialist monitoring her high-risk pregnancy. When Amelia gently explained this, citing her doctor's own written instructions, Sophia waved a hand and said the family had perfectly good doctors of their own, ones who had delivered 3 generations of Whitfield children without any trouble at all. Amelia turned to Alexander, certain, absolutely certain, that her husband would step in. Instead, Alexander rubbed the back of his neck, avoided her eyes, and said the words that would echo in Amelia's mind for years afterward. "Amelia, it's just 10 weeks. My mother has done a lot for us. Can you try not to make this so difficult right now?" Difficult. That was the word he chose, while their unborn child's safety hung in the balance, while Amelia's own doctor had put concerns about her health in writing. Amelia asked him directly, quietly, if he understood what he was asking her to risk. Alexander looked at his mother, then back at his wife, and said 4 words that ended something inside Amelia that night. "Family comes first, Amelia." Amelia did not scream. She did not throw anything, did not slam a single door. She simply nodded, excused herself, and walked upstairs to the guest room where they were staying that weekend, sat on the edge of the bed, and placed both hands over her stomach. In that silence, something shifted permanently. She realized, with a clarity that frightened her, that she was completely alone in this marriage, that the man who had promised to protect her had just chosen his mother's gala over his own child's safety, and that no apology in a hallway would ever undo what had just been said out loud, in front of witnesses, without hesitation. Over the following 2 weeks, Amelia became someone Alexander did not recognize, calm, agreeable, almost cheerful. She told him she had thought it over and would go along with moving to the estate temporarily. She smiled at Sophia over dinner. She let the household staff pack boxes for the guest wing. What Alexander did not know, what Sophia never suspected, was that Amelia had already made one phone call that changed everything. A call to her college roommate Olivia Hart, who had become a family law attorney in North Carolina. Olivia listened to every detail and quietly began helping Amelia build a plan, a bank account Alexander did not know existed, a rental apartment secured under Olivia's name, and a doctor in Asheville who specialized in high-risk pregnancies and had already agreed to take Amelia on as a patient. The night before the planned move to Greenwich, Amelia waited until Alexander fell asleep. She had already shipped 2 boxes ahead through Olivia's office. She left the ring on the nightstand, along with a short note that said only, "I hope you find whatever piece you were choosing that night. I have to choose something too." She took her car, her medical records, a single suitcase, and the framed photograph of her own late mother, and she drove through the night toward North Carolina, toward a town where nobody knew the name Whitfield, and where nobody would ever ask her to prove that her health mattered more than a party. Alexander woke to an empty house, and a silence so complete it felt like a physical weight. He called Amelia's phone until it stopped ringing altogether, days later, when she changed the number entirely. He called her old coworkers, her cousin in South Carolina, even hospitals along the interstate, but Olivia had done her work carefully and legally, and there was nothing illegal about a grown woman choosing to leave her marriage. Sophia's response was not panic, but fury, the cold and controlled fury of a woman who had never once in her life been disobeyed. "She will come crawling back within the month," Sophia told Alexander. "Women like that always do." The months passed. Amelia did not come back. In a small rented apartment above a bakery in Asheville, Amelia gave birth to a healthy baby boy on a rainy Tuesday morning, with Olivia holding one hand and a nurse she had known for less than 4 months holding the other. She named him Henry, after her own grandfather, a man who had never once made her feel small. There was a complication during delivery that the doctors handled quickly and quietly. A note in the chart about an early anomaly on the initial ultrasound that nobody had ever fully explained to her. A note Amelia was far too exhausted and far too relieved to ask about that day. She held her son, healthy and whole, and she wept for the first time since the night she packed those 9 shirts. Amelia built a life in Asheville the way a person rebuilds a house after a storm, one careful board at a time. She used savings her own mother had left her to open a small bakery, the kind with mismatched chairs and cinnamon in the air, the kind that becomes a town's favorite within 2 years. She raised Henry surrounded by women who had also rebuilt their own lives, women who never once asked her to explain her past. By the time Henry turned 6, Amelia owned 2 bakery locations, had been featured in a regional magazine as one of the state's most promising small business owners, and had finally, quietly, let herself fall in love again with a kind, steady man named Julian Foster who ran the hardware store 2 doors down and never once asked her to be anyone smaller than she already was. It was Julian, in fact, who convinced Amelia to attend the Southeastern Small Business Awards Gala in Boston, an event honoring women who had built companies from nothing. Amelia almost declined 3 separate times. Something about a formal gala still made her stomach tighten, though she could never quite name why. She said yes only because Henry, now 7, begged to see her accept the award she had earned, and because Julian promised to stand beside her the entire night. She wore an emerald green dress that had absolutely nothing to do with the Whitfield family, and everything to do with the fact that it made her feel, for the first time in years, entirely like herself. Alexander Whitfield was seated at a sponsor table that night for reasons that had nothing to do with Amelia at all. The Whitfield Foundation had quietly funded a business grant program years earlier, one Sophia had insisted on for the family's public image. And Alexander, now separated from his mother's daily control after a falling out over the company's finances, had taken over sponsor duties almost as a way of proving to himself that he could still do something decent with the family name. He was not looking for Amelia. He had, in fact, stopped actively searching for her nearly 2 years earlier, when a grief counselor finally convinced him that some silences are answers, and some answers deserve to be respected. He had no way of knowing that the woman about to walk onto that stage was his wife. When Amelia's name was called and she stepped up to accept her award, the room applauded warmly, the way rooms do for strangers with good stories. Alexander applauded along with everyone else, absently, his mind somewhere else entirely, until the moment she turned toward the audience, laughing at something the host had said, and the light caught her face at exactly the angle it always used to when she laughed at his jokes across their old kitchen table. His glass slipped from his hand and broke into pieces against the marble floor, drawing a ripple of soft laughter from nearby tables, who assumed he had simply been startled. Amelia heard the sound, turned toward it out of pure instinct, and found herself staring directly into the eyes of the man she had left sleeping in a Connecticut bedroom 7 years earlier. Neither of them moved for a long moment. Then Henry, seated at Amelia's table beside Julian, tugged gently on his mother's sleeve and asked, in the clear, curious voice of a 7-year-old, who that man was, the one staring at her like he had seen a ghost. Amelia knelt beside her son, steadied her own breathing, and told him the truth in the simplest words she could find, that the man was someone from a long time ago, someone who had made a very difficult choice, and that everything was completely fine. It was, in that moment, the truest sentence she had spoken in years. Everything was fine because she had made sure of it herself, one quiet decision at a time. Alexander approached only after the applause had faded and most of the room had turned back to their own conversations. What he said first was not an excuse. It was an apology, 7 years too late. But real. He told her he had searched for 2 years and stopped only because he finally understood he had no right to find her unless she wanted to be found. He asked, carefully, gently, if the little boy across the room was his son. Amelia answered honestly. Yes, his name is Henry. And here, at last, is where this story takes the turn none of us saw coming. The detail buried all the way back at that very first ultrasound, the small pause the technician made, the note in Amelia's delivery chart that nobody had ever fully explained. Amelia had been carrying twins. A rare and early complication, one twin's development had slowed dramatically in the first trimester, so faintly that most routine scans in a small practice would have missed it entirely. And Amelia's own doctor genuinely believed, right up until delivery, that only one baby remained viable. But Sophia Whitfield's personal physician in Greenwich, the same doctor Sophia had insisted Amelia use for those final 10 weeks, had caught something different during a private consultation months earlier that Amelia was never told about in full. There had, in fact, been 2 heartbeats far longer than Amelia ever knew, and Sophia, terrified of a public scandal involving a fragile pregnancy and a family name she controlled like a fortress, had quietly arranged for that information to disappear from every record Amelia was allowed to see. Amelia learned the full truth only months after that Boston gala, when Alexander, working through his own guilt with a private investigator, uncovered medical records from Sophia's physician showing a second heartbeat recorded as late as week 24, along with a guardianship filing Sophia had prepared in secret, nomming herself sole custodian of any surviving Whitfield heir, in the event Amelia's high-risk pregnancy ended badly. Sophia's true plan had never been about a gala at all. It had been about controlling the birth entirely, on Whitfield property, under a Whitfield doctor, so that if complications forced impossible choices, Sophia alone would decide which child, and which mother, mattered enough to save. Amelia had not simply escaped a controlling mother-in-law. She had escaped a plan that treated her body as property and her children as assets. The second child, a girl Sophia's private doctor had quietly delivered early and placed, through a closed and deliberately obscured arrangement, with a distant Whitfield cousin in Vermont who had no idea of the child's true origin, was found 18 months later through Alexander's investigation and a court order that finally forced Sophia's own physician to testify. Her name was Grace, 7 years old, being raised only 90 minutes from the very estate where Amelia had once been told to sacrifice her health for a party. When Amelia finally held her daughter for the first time, in a quiet courthouse hallway with Henry standing close beside her, she did not think of Sophia's fury, or Alexander's guilt, or the 7 lost years. She thought only of how right it felt, finally, to have both of her children in the same room, safe together, and completely hers. Sophia Whitfield faced the consequences of that decade of quiet manipulation in a courtroom, not a ballroom, stripped of the guardianship she had engineered and publicly named in a ruling that made regional news for weeks. Alexander spent the following years rebuilding a relationship with both his children, slowly, carefully, on Amelia's terms rather than his mother's, and never once tried to insert himself back into Amelia's marriage to Julian. Amelia's bakery grew into a small regional brand. Henry and Grace grew up as inseparable siblings who never once had to wonder whether their mother would choose them over anyone else in the world. And Amelia, the woman who once folded 9 shirts in silence rather than beg to be believed, finally understood that walking away that night had not been the end of her story. It had been the very beginning of it. If you were Amelia, sitting in that courthouse hallway, could you have forgiven Alexander the way she eventually did? Or would you have walked away from him completely, for good this time? Tell us in the comments below, and if this story moved you, make sure you subscribe, because we tell stories exactly like this one every single week, and we would love to have you back for the next one.